In the pre-dawn hours of a spring morning in 1945, specifically at approximately 2:47 on the 12th of April, somewhere along the coral formations known as Kakazu Ridge on the island of Okinawa, a military officer serving the Japanese Empire sat hunched in darkness. His writing implement, fashioned from bamboo, moved across traditional rice paper as he attempted to document something that would fundamentally challenge everything he had learned during 3 decades of military service. His fingers shook as he composed what would become among the very few authenticated records of Japanese forces encountering a revolutionary American technological capability. The words he scratched onto the paper described devices that granted American soldiers the ability to perceive their surroundings in total darkness, a capability that seemed almost supernatural to those who faced it. This was no rumor or battlefield myth, the officer insisted in his documentation. He had witnessed the results himself, measured the distances, counted the dead. American soldiers had successfully engaged and killed Japanese infiltrators at ranges the officer calculated to be approximately 70 yards, doing so in absolute blackness without any visible muzzle flashes that might betray their positions. The Americans could see the Japanese soldiers moving through the night, while the Japanese themselves were completely blind, unable to detect their enemies or even understand how they were being targeted with such precision. Throughout that moonless evening, forces serving the Japanese military had stumbled into something that contradicted every principle their army had instilled regarding superiority in nighttime combat operations. For roughly 3 years of Pacific warfare, Japanese military units had maintained overwhelming dominance whenever fighting occurred after sunset. Their techniques for attacking under cover of darkness, refined and perfected through combat experience stretching all the way back to the conflict with Russia in 1904, had created terror among Allied military personnel from the jungles of Guadalcanal all the way to the mountains of Burma. Yet here, positioned on this particular coral ridge on Okinawa, American soldiers were somehow engaging Japanese infiltrators, moving through pitch darkness with a level of accuracy that seemed to defy the natural limitations of human eyesight. The assault element drawn from the night attack specialists of the Japanese 62nd Division had been effectively destroyed. Every single soldier in the formation had been killed by accurate fire originating from enemies who should have been just as blind as the Japanese forces themselves. There had been no illumination shells arcing overhead, no searchlight beams cutting through the darkness, no parachute flares drifting down to reveal positions. Only precise carbine fire emanating from American positions that logically should have been operating completely blind. The Americans had somehow acquired technology that transformed the darkness from Japan's most valuable tactical asset into a lethal environment where only American forces possessed the ability to see clearly. What those Japanese forces could not have known during that deadly night was that they had made contact with a weapons system designated as the T3 carbine, later given the standardized designation M3, equipped with what was called a sniper scope, representing a revolutionary infrared-based night vision system that provided American soldiers with clear vision at distances ranging from 70 to 125 yards, even in complete absence of natural or artificial light. This technology was classified at such a high level of secrecy that even the majority of American military personnel serving in the Pacific had no knowledge of its existence. The devices would play a significant role in the psychological destruction of Japanese military forces, whose entire tactical philosophy had been constructed around the assumption of night combat superiority. The transformation of how warfare occurred after dark was being demonstrated not through massive conventional battles, but in the intimate darkness where Japanese soldiers would discover that their empire's greatest tactical advantage had been rendered obsolete by American technological innovation. The Japanese military's mastery of combat operations conducted at night had roots extending deep into their military history. Beginning from the Meiji Restoration period, the Imperial Army had placed enormous emphasis on nighttime operations as a method to counterbalance the technological advantages possessed by Western military forces. During the siege of Port Arthur in 1904, Japanese night assault tactics had successfully overwhelmed Russian defensive positions that had been considered impregnable. This tactical doctrine was continuously refined through many decades of combat experience throughout China, where infiltration and assault techniques conducted under darkness became the identifying signature of Japanese tactical excellence. The military manual focused on night fighting techniques, which had been captured by American intelligence personnel and translated during 1944, contained a revealing statement about Japanese military philosophy. It declared that nighttime conditions level all forms of technical superiority, asserting that in darkness, the warrior's spirit and quality of training overcome any mechanical advantages an enemy might possess. The manual boldly claimed that one properly trained Japanese soldier operating at night held the combat value equivalent to 10 enemy soldiers who depended on technology. This assertion was not merely propaganda designed to boost morale among Japanese troops. During the Guadalcanal campaign of 1942, Japanese forces launching attacks after dark had very nearly succeeded in pushing Marine forces back into the sea. The desperate fighting around what became known as Edson's Ridge and the airfield at Henderson Field had been won by margins so incredibly thin that Marine commanders privately acknowledged that Japanese night tactics had come dangerously close to achieving complete success. Colonel Merritt Edson himself documented in his official after-action report that Japanese forces approached during darkness like phantoms. His Marines had fired at sounds, at shadows, at figments of their own imagination. The Japanese moved through the darkness as though they had been born specifically for that environment. Statistical analysis conducted by the Operations Research Office of the United States Army revealed that during the period from 1942 through 1944, Japanese military forces inflicted roughly 60% of all American casualties during operations conducted at night, despite the fact that nighttime combat comprised only approximately 30% of total engagement duration. Night infiltration specialists achieved casualty ratios significantly more favorable compared to their performance during daylight operations. The mathematics demonstrated conclusively that darkness belonged to Japan. The training regimen Japanese soldiers underwent to prepare for night combat was both extensive and rigorous beyond what most Western militaries practiced. Soldiers trained while blindfolded for months at a time, developing the ability to disassemble their weapons completely and reassemble them using only their sense of touch. They practiced moving silently through complete darkness, learning to communicate through subtle physical contact and predetermined signals. They studied the distinctive sounds produced by American military equipment until they could distinguish the mechanical action of an M1 Garand from a Browning automatic rifle at 50 yards, based purely on the sounds the weapons made. The revolution in how warfare could be conducted after dark began not on any battlefield, but within American research laboratories. The project to develop an infrared sniper scope had its origins in 1943, when the National Defense Research Committee recognized the critical need for some form of night vision capability. The Radio Corporation of America had been developing image intensifier tube technology since the middle 1930s, and by 1943, their engineers had successfully created the 1P25 tube capable of converting invisible infrared light wavelengths into visible images that human operators could perceive. The complete system consisted of multiple integrated components working together. An infrared spotlight that emitted light completely invisible to human vision was mounted above the carbine's barrel. A specialized scope containing the image intensifier tube could detect this infrared illumination and convert it into visible light. The T3 carbine experimental model, later standardized with the M3 designation, was essentially a modified M2 carbine that had been fitted with this infrared optical system. During testing conducted at Aberdeen Proving Ground, operators using the system achieved hit rates of 80% against human-sized targets positioned at 70 yards in complete darkness, representing revolutionary levels of accuracy for nighttime combat engagements. The effective engagement range varied from 70 yards under poor environmental conditions up to 125 yards when circumstances were ideal. By the later months of 1944, limited production had commenced. The Radio Corporation of America manufactured approximately 1,700 infrared scopes during the entire duration of World War II, with roughly 150 complete T-3M3 weapons systems reaching the Pacific Theater of Operations by the spring of 1945. The weapons arrived accompanied by extremely strict security protocols governing their use and distribution. Only specially selected marksmen with specific qualifications were permitted to receive training on the system. These operators were explicitly forbidden from discussing the equipment even with other American military personnel serving alongside them. The Battle of Okinawa, which commenced on the 1st of April 1945, would become the first major combat test where this infrared night vision technology would be employed in significant numbers. United States Army units participating in the invasion, particularly the 96th Infantry Division and the 7th Infantry Division, received the initial shipments of T3 carbines during early April of 1945. Distribution of the weapons was deliberately limited, with the typical allocation being 2 carbines per rifle company, and only in sectors where Japanese night infiltration was anticipated based on terrain analysis and intelligence assessments. According to the official historical account published by the United States Army under the title Okinawa, The Last Battle, the infrared sniper scope proved its effectiveness immediately against Japanese night infiltration tactics. The after-action report filed by the 96th Infantry Division noted that enemy night infiltration, which had previously represented their most serious tactical challenge, had been largely neutralized through new equipment that allowed engagement of targets in complete darkness. That initial night of combat operations, spanning from April 1st through the early morning hours of April 2nd in 1945, saw Japanese forces launch their traditional night infiltration attacks against American defensive positions. These attack methods, which had proven devastatingly effective throughout every previous campaign of the Pacific War, were met with something Japanese commanders had never encountered before. American soldiers equipped with the infrared sniper scopes could observe with perfect clarity Japanese soldiers moving through what those Japanese troops believed was concealing darkness. A report filed by the 7th Infantry Division described the psychological impact observed among enemy forces. Japanese units exhibited obvious confusion and organizational breakdown when engaged by accurate fire originating from complete darkness. Their traditional infiltration tactics were abandoned immediately after suffering initial casualties from this mysterious American capability. The infrared system operated according to principles that were simple in concept but revolutionary in battlefield application. The infrared spotlight, essentially a sealed beam lamp fitted with specialized infrared filters, projected a cone of invisible light extending up to 150 yards from the weapon. This light reflected off objects and terrain and was captured by the image intensifier tube in the scope. The 1P25 tube, manufactured by the Radio Corporation of America, amplified the infrared light wavelengths and converted them to visible wavelengths, presenting the operator with a green-tinted but remarkably clear image of the battlefield environment. Technical Sergeant John Murray, serving with the 96th Infantry Division as one of the first soldiers trained to operate the sniper scope system, described his experience during an interview conducted in 1985 with the Army's Center of Military History. Looking through that optical scope at night was unlike anything he had ever experienced in his military career. Japanese soldiers appeared as bright green figures standing out against darker backgrounds in the scope's view. He could see their facial features clearly, identify their rank insignia, recognize what weapons they were carrying. They moved carefully and professionally, employing excellent light infantry tactics that demonstrated their training. But they had absolutely no idea American soldiers could observe them with such clarity. The psychological advantage proved just as significant as the technological capability itself. Murray continued his description by noting that Japanese forces had owned the night for 3 solid years of Pacific combat. They moved with complete confidence when operating in darkness. Watching them through the scope's green-tinted view, an observer could see that confidence manifested in their movements and behavior. Then American forces would open fire, and observers could witness the confusion and panic that resulted. Japanese soldiers could not comprehend how American forces could see them with such precision. The infrared spotlight was completely invisible to unaided human vision, meaning Japanese forces never saw any beam of light coming toward them. Operators received training to fire single shots or short bursts, then immediately relocate their position. This made counter-battery fire impossible, even if Japanese forces could somehow determine the general direction from which incoming fire originated. Within just 1 week of the invasion commencing, Japanese night operations across Okinawa had decreased dramatically in frequency and scope. The 32nd Army defending Okinawa under the command of General Mitsuru Ushijima had developed plans for extensive night counterattacks as a central component of their defensive strategy. These carefully prepared plans were largely abandoned after the casualties suffered during the first week's operations. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, serving as senior operations officer of the 32nd Army, and among the very few senior officers who would survive the entire battle, wrote in his post-war memoir published in 1973 under the title The Battle for Okinawa, that their night assault units, which had never experienced failure during 3 years of war, were being eliminated before they could even reach American defensive lines. The Americans possessed some capability that Japanese forces did not understand. While Yahara's memoir does not specifically identify infrared technology by name, he most likely never learned the exact nature of the American capability he faced, but he thoroughly documented the complete breakdown of Japanese night operations across the island. Units that had specialized in night combat operations refused to leave their cave positions after sunset. The sophisticated infiltration tactics that had been refined over many decades of combat experience were completely abandoned. The Operations Research Office of the United States Army calculated that during the first week of combat on Okinawa, units equipped with infrared devices accounted for approximately 30% of all Japanese casualties caused by small arms fire during night operations, despite the fact that these specialized weapons represented less than 1% of total American weapons present on the island. This extraordinary level of effectiveness led to rapid modifications in Japanese tactical approaches across all units. Declassified technical reports from 1945 reveal both the impressive capabilities and the significant limitations of the infrared sniperscope system, limitations that Japanese forces never discovered or learned to exploit. The device operated effectively in complete darkness, but had several significant constraints that could have been exploited if Japanese forces had understood the technology's nature. The battery system, utilizing heavy lead-acid cells similar to those found in automobiles, limited continuous operation to approximately 20 to 30 minutes, though intermittent use could extend operational duration to several hours. The complete system's weight, nearly 30 pounds, made rapid movement extremely difficult for operators. Sniperscope specialists were essentially fixed-position operators rather than mobile infantry capable of maneuvering quickly. Weather conditions significantly affected performance characteristics. Heavy rainfall reduced effective engagement range to under 40 yards. Fog and smoke scattered the infrared light, creating halos that obscured potential targets. White phosphorus, commonly employed in combat operations, rendered the system temporarily useless by overwhelming the image intensifier. However, Japanese forces, remaining unaware of the technology's fundamental nature, never systematically tested these conditions or developed countermeasures. The infrared spotlight, while invisible to unaided human vision, could theoretically be detected by anyone looking directly at the source through certain optical devices equipped with specially coated lenses. Some Japanese naval binoculars actually possessed the technical capability to detect infrared wavelengths. But Japanese forces never realized this potential vulnerability existed, never developed detection procedures or distributed guidance about optical detection methods. As the Okinawa campaign progressed through subsequent weeks, American forces refined their employment techniques for the infrared sniperscopes. The 7th Infantry Division developed a tactical technique they called infrared ambush, positioning the devices to provide coverage over likely infiltration routes, including trails, water sources, and gaps in wire obstacles. These positions would remain completely dark and silent until Japanese forces entered what had been designated as the kill zone. Then operators would engage with devastating accuracy against targets who had no awareness they were being observed. The after-action report from the 96th Infantry Division described their employment methodology in detail. Sniper scope operators were positioned to provide overlapping fields of observation across the defensive front. Primary sectors of responsibility were assigned with deliberate overlap to ensure complete coverage of the entire defensive frontage. Operators engaged individual targets of opportunity while simultaneously reporting larger formations for engagement by artillery or mortar fire. Another innovation involved psychological warfare through selective engagement patterns. Some infiltration attempts would be permitted to pass through American positions completely unmolested, while other attempts would be eliminated entirely. This randomness created paralyzing uncertainty among Japanese forces who never knew whether they were being actively observed or had somehow avoided detection. The limited total number of devices available, approximately 150 for the entire Okinawa operation involving hundreds of thousands of combatants, meant that careful tactical distribution was essential. Priority for allocation went to sectors where night infiltration was assessed as most likely based on terrain analysis. This included gaps in defensive lines, supply routes, water points, and approaches to command posts. The scarcity of the devices actually enhanced their effectiveness by creating uncertainty about exactly where the capability existed at any given time. Japanese intelligence personnel desperately attempted to understand the nature of American night fighting capability they were facing. Captured Japanese documents from Okinawa, translated by the Allied translator and interpreter section, reveal various theories about American night fighting capabilities ranging from partially correct assessments to fantastic speculation. One intelligence report originating from the 62nd Division, dated the 20th of April 1945, speculated that Americans might possess infrared detection equipment similar to technology used in aerial photography applications. The report suggested as a countermeasure that movement during rainfall might degrade the effectiveness of such systems. This assessment was remarkably close to the actual truth, but without understanding the active infrared spotlight component of the system, Japanese forces could not develop truly effective countermeasures. Another report suggested Americans had developed some form of pharmaceutical drug that enhanced natural night vision capabilities, leading to experiments where some Japanese troops consumed massive quantities of vitamin A in an attempt to match this supposed capability. Some units tried covering themselves with mud to reduce body heat signatures, incorrectly assuming that thermal detection technology was involved. The most accurate assessment came from a captured Japanese technical officer's notebook recovered during the fighting. This officer theorized that Americans were using some form of artificial light source invisible to human vision, combined with a viewing device capable of detecting this light. This represented the closest any Japanese assessment came to understanding the actual technology, but the notebook provided no recommendations for countermeasures. The uncertainty about where infrared capability existed had a force multiplication effect far beyond the actual number of devices deployed. Japanese units avoided night operations across wide sections of the front, even in areas where no infrared capability actually existed. The intelligence section of the 10th Army noted in their summary reports that the enemy had largely abandoned night infiltration tactics across the entire operational area. Prisoners reported widespread fear among Japanese units of American ability to see in complete darkness. This capability, whether actually present or merely feared in any given sector, had neutralized what had been the enemy's primary tactical advantage. The collapse of Japanese night combat capability had cascading effects throughout their entire defensive plan for Okinawa. The 32nd Army's strategy had relied heavily on movement conducted at night to resupply forward positions, evacuate wounded personnel, and conduct reconnaissance missions. Without the ability to move safely during hours of darkness, Japanese forces became increasingly isolated in their defensive positions. Supply lines that had operated under cover of darkness were effectively severed. Forward units couldn't be reinforced with fresh troops. Cave positions and bunkers couldn't receive resupply of ammunition and food. Wounded personnel couldn't be evacuated to aid stations. Communication between separated positions, often conducted by runners moving at night, completely broke down. The sophisticated defense in depth that General Ushijima had planned became instead a series of isolated strongpoints that could be reduced individually by American forces. The official history published by the United States Army noted that Japanese inability to operate at night, whether resulting from actual infrared observation or simply fear of such observation, contributed significantly to accelerating the overall campaign. Defensive positions that might have held out for weeks were isolated and reduced in a matter of days when Japanese forces could not resupply or reinforce them after dark. The training materials developed for infrared sniper scope operators, declassified during the 1990s, reveal the thoroughness of American preparation for this specialized mission. Operators underwent 40 hours of specialized training covering multiple areas of expertise, including theory of infrared light physics and image intensification technology, equipment maintenance procedures and troubleshooting, target identification and range estimation using green-tinted imagery, battery management and power conservation techniques, tactical employment and positioning considerations, and security procedures to prevent equipment capture. The technical manual, designated TM5-9341 Sniper Scope Set Infrared M2, emphasized that operators were to destroy their equipment rather than allow capture by enemy forces. Each device included thermite grenades specifically designated for equipment destruction if the position was in danger of being overrun. This extreme security measure indicates how highly valuable the technology was considered by American military leadership. Operators were selected from soldiers who had demonstrated expert marksmanship and also exhibited emotional stability and ability to work independently. The psychological burden of killing enemies who could not see their attackers was recognized early in the training development. Training materials emphasized that operators were saving American lives by preventing infiltration, not simply executing helpless enemies, an important distinction for maintaining operator morale. The American infrared sniper scope was not developed in complete isolation from parallel efforts by other nations. German forces had pursued parallel development with their ZG-1229 Vampir system designed for the STG-44 assault rifle. However, the German system saw only extremely limited deployment during the final months of the European War, primarily used by Panzer Grenadier units during the Battle of the Bulge and the Rhine crossing operations. The American achievement was not merely in developing the technology itself, but in successfully deploying it in significant numbers to the Pacific Theater, properly training operators, and maintaining operational security that prevented compromise. The Japanese, despite possessing their own advanced optical industry, including companies like Nippon Kogaku, which would later become Nikon, had not pursued infrared technology for infantry applications. This technological gap represented a broader pattern evident throughout the Pacific War. While Japanese forces often displayed superior training and tactics in specific areas like night combat, American industrial capacity and technological innovation could rapidly neutralize these advantages through material solutions. The infrared sniper scope represented a perfect example of this pattern, a technological solution to what had been a tactical problem. While many specific Japanese testimonies remain unverified or may have been created as composite accounts for training purposes, American combat reports provide clear documentation. Regimental journals from the 7th Infantry Division covering April 1945 contain numerous entries describing successful night engagements at ranges that had previously been impossible. One verified account from the 96th Infantry Division describes an engagement occurring on the 15th of April 1945. A sniper scope operator engaged an enemy patrol estimated at approximately 12 individuals at 11:30 in the evening. Range was approximately 75 yards. 8 enemy soldiers were killed, with the remainder fleeing the engagement area. No friendly casualties were sustained. Enemy forces showed no awareness of observation before engagement commenced. Another report from the 7th Infantry Division, dated the 28th of April 1945, documented that an infrared-equipped position reported and engaged an enemy supply party moving along a designated trail at 2:30 in the morning. 6 enemy soldiers were killed, and supplies were subsequently destroyed by mortar fire directed by the sniper scope operator who could observe the target area. The enemy had not attempted to use this particular trail during subsequent nights, suggesting they had concluded it was under observation. Unable to operate effectively on the surface during darkness, Japanese forces retreated deeper into Okinawa's extensive cave systems. These natural and artificial tunnel networks had been prepared as defensive positions before the American invasion, but now became the only refuge from American night observation capabilities. Colonel Yahara's memoir describes this forced adaptation in stark terms. Japanese forces were reduced to remaining inside caves during hours of darkness. Surface movement was authorized only during daylight under concealment from terrain or vegetation. This complete reversal of their traditional tactical approach was devastating to unit morale. This forced adaptation into the cave systems created its own cascade of problems. The tunnel systems, while extensive across the island, were not fully connected into an integrated network. Units became isolated from each other, unable to coordinate operations or share supplies effectively. The sophisticated defense in depth that had been planned for Okinawa's defense collapsed into isolated pockets of resistance that could not support each other. Disease spread rapidly in overcrowded cave environments with inadequate sanitation. Supplies that did exist could not be distributed effectively between separated units. Military units lost cohesion and fighting effectiveness. The defensive network that was supposed to protect Japanese forces became instead a series of traps from which they could not escape. While the infrared sniper scopes did not directly cause all casualties suffered by Japanese forces, they forced the tactical adaptation into caves that led to these conditions. The battle for Shuri Castle, occurring in late May 1945, demonstrated the complete reversal of night combat dynamics that had occurred. Shuri, the ancient castle serving as General Ushijima's headquarters location, had been expected to be defended by sophisticated night counterattacks. These plans were largely abandoned due to American night vision capability. The 1st Marine Division history records that expected night counterattacks during the Shuri battle never materialized in any significant form. Enemy forces confined offensive action to daylight hours or dawn-dusk periods with reduced visibility. Night defensive positions were abandoned without a fight. Prisoners indicated widespread fear of American night observation capability. By June 1945, as the Okinawa campaign entered its final phase, Japanese forces had completely abandoned their traditional night tactics across the entire island. General Ushijima's final order, issued on the 18th of June 1945, acknowledged this grim reality. Night surface operations are prohibited except for final defensive stands where survival is not expected. The campaign statistics showed the dramatic impact across all metrics. American casualties during night operations decreased by 78% in sectors with infrared coverage compared to early Pacific War battles. Japanese night operations, which had been their primary tactical advantage since 1942, effectively ceased to exist as an organized capability. Following Japan's surrender, American technical intelligence teams conducted extensive analysis of Japanese responses to infrared technology. The Strategic Bombing Survey, which included interviews with Japanese military leaders, found that while many officers were aware Americans possessed some form of night vision capability, none understood its exact technical nature. The Far East Command's study of Japanese night combat, published in 1946, concluded that introduction of infrared viewing devices effectively neutralized Japanese night fighting capabilities on Okinawa. This single technological advantage disrupted tactical doctrine that had been developed over 40 years and contributed materially to accelerating the campaign's conclusion. Former Japanese officers interviewed by occupation forces during the post-war period consistently cited the loss of night combat capability as among the most significant losses of the war, the most demoralizing aspects of the Okinawa battle. While they could accept being outgunned in terms of artillery and air support, and could accept being outproduced in terms of logistics and reinforcements, the loss of darkness, where skill and training had always prevailed over mere technology, struck at the fundamental core of Japanese military identity. The infrared sniper scope's success during the Okinawa campaign led to continued development and eventual deployment during the Korean conflict. By 1950, improved versions with better effective range and battery life had become standard equipment for specialized applications. The M3 carbine with infrared scope became a specialized tool primarily used for defending fixed positions against night infiltration attempts. During the Korean War, Chinese and North Korean forces, many of whom received advice from Japanese veterans who had survived Okinawa, initially avoided night operations against American forces, believing incorrectly that all United States units possessed night vision technology. This overcaution, based directly on the Okinawa experience passed down through Japanese advisors, provided American forces with an unexpected advantage during the war's early phases. The psychological legacy of Okinawa's night battles influenced communist tactical doctrine throughout the Korean conflict. Only after discovering through combat experience that most American units actually lacked night vision devices did communist forces resume large-scale night operations. Even then, the fear persisted among communist troops. Every unexplained night casualty was attributed to American infrared technology, whether or not it was actually present. The primitive infrared technology first demonstrated on Okinawa evolved rapidly through subsequent decades. The active infrared system, which required an infrared spotlight that could theoretically be detected, was gradually replaced by passive systems that amplified available ambient light. By the Vietnam conflict, starlight scopes could function using only moonlight or starlight for illumination, eliminating the need for active illumination that could potentially be detected by enemy forces. Modern night vision technology has progressed through multiple generations of improvement, from the simple infrared devices of 1945 to contemporary thermal imaging and advanced image intensification systems. Current technology can detect human targets at ranges exceeding 1 mile in virtually any weather condition, without requiring any active illumination whatsoever. The capability gap first demonstrated on Okinawa has only widened with each passing decade. Yet the fundamental lesson from Okinawa remains unchanged across all eras of warfare. The military force that owns the night owns the battlefield. The Japanese infantry soldiers who faced infrared snipers during 1945 were the first combatants to learn this harsh truth of modern technological warfare. Beyond statistics and tactical analysis, the infrared sniper scope's impact must be measured in human terms that transcend numbers. American soldiers who operated the devices carried complex psychological burdens that distinguished their experience from normal infantry combat. Many operators reported feeling more like executioners than soldiers, killing enemies who possessed no ability to fight back effectively. Post-war psychological studies of sniper scope operators identified higher rates of combat stress compared to regular infantry soldiers. The impersonal nature of killing through a green-tinted optical scope, often watching enemies for extended periods before engaging them, created unique psychological pressures not present in conventional combat. Veterans described the difficulty of watching Japanese soldiers prepare defensive positions, eat their rations, or write letters home before killing them with precise fire they could not anticipate or avoid. For Japanese forces facing this technology, the psychological trauma manifested differently but proved equally profound. The loss of night, traditionally a time of Japanese tactical superiority and confidence, created a sense of helplessness that transcended normal military defeat. Soldiers who had trained their entire military careers for night combat excellence found their hard-won skills rendered completely useless against an enemy who had transcended normal human limitations through technology. Military historians studying Okinawa's night battles have identified several crucial lessons that shaped post-war military doctrine development. First, technological surprise multiplies its impact through psychological effects beyond the technology's actual capabilities. The actual number of infrared devices deployed was quite limited, but fear of the capability paralyzed Japanese operations across much wider areas. Not knowing exactly where the technology existed proved more operationally damaging than the technology itself. Second, disrupting fundamental tactical assumptions underlying military doctrine can cause collapse of entire military systems. Japanese doctrine had assumed that night combat would always favor superior training over technological advantages. When this core assumption proved false, the entire tactical framework collapsed like a house built on flawed foundations. Third, information dominance, specifically seeing while remaining unseen, provides advantages that transcend simple firepower advantages. The infrared sniper scopes killed relatively few Japanese soldiers through direct fire, but their psychological and tactical impact affected the entire Japanese defensive effort across the island. The complete story of infrared employment during Okinawa remained classified for many decades after the war's conclusion. Key documents were only declassified during the 1990s, including the technical manual designated TM5-9341 detailing the sniper scope system specifications, after-action reports from the 96th and 7th Infantry Divisions, intelligence summaries from the Allied translator and interpreter section, and post-war interrogation reports compiled by the Strategic Bombing Survey. These documents revealed both the revolutionary nature of the technology and the extraordinary lengths taken to protect it from compromise. Even following the war's end, specific details about infrared capabilities remained restricted information for years. Veterans were actively discouraged from discussing their experiences with the devices in public forums. This security consciousness indicates how highly valuable the capability was considered for potential future conflicts. The fundamentally one-sided nature of infrared combat raised ethical questions that persist in discussions of modern warfare. Is it ethically acceptable to employ technology that removes the enemy's practical ability to fight back effectively? The infrared sniper scope operators on Okinawa wrestled with this question during every night they operated their devices. Post-war military ethicists have debated extensively whether such overwhelming technological advantages constitute honorable warfare within traditional military ethics. Some analysts argue that any advantage that saves friendly lives while achieving military objectives is fully justified under the laws of war. Others contend that warfare requires some element of reciprocal risk to remain legitimate combat rather than simple execution of helpless enemies. The Japanese perspective, expressed through post-war military writings and memoirs, generally accepted the technology as a legitimate evolution of warfare methods. The shame perceived by Japanese military writers was not in facing superior technology, but rather in failing to anticipate and prepare for its development and deployment. The infrared sniper scope was viewed as another example of American material superiority, frustrating but not fundamentally illegitimate as a weapon of war. The infrared sniper scope's documented success on Okinawa influenced American military development priorities for many decades following the war. The emphasis on maintaining technological superiority, particularly in sensors and information-gathering systems, traces directly to lessons learned in 1945. The concept of owning the night became absolutely central to American military doctrine across all services. Investment in night vision technology continued throughout the Cold War period and beyond into the present day. Each successive generation of technology has widened the capability gap between forces that can see in darkness and those that cannot. The advantage first demonstrated with primitive infrared devices on Okinawa has become a defining characteristic of American military superiority that persists into the 21st century. For potential adversaries studying American military history, Okinawa demonstrated conclusively that traditional advantages in training quality, troop motivation, or tactical doctrine could be completely negated by technological superiority. This fundamental lesson influenced military development priorities worldwide, spurring investment in night vision and other sensor technologies across many nations. The revolution that began with approximately 150 primitive infrared devices has shaped global military competition across every decade since. Based on declassified documents and technical manuals now available to researchers, the actual specifications of the T3M3 carbine with infrared sniper scope can be stated with precision. Complete system weight was approximately 28 to 30 pounds. Effective engagement range varied from 70 yards under poor environmental conditions to 125 yards under ideal circumstances. Battery life provided 20 to 30 minutes of continuous use, or 3 to 4 hours when used intermittently. The image intensifier employed was the RCA-1P25 tube. Power source consisted of a 6-volt lead-acid battery pack. The infrared source was a sealed beam lamp fitted with infrared filters. Total production reached approximately 1,700 scopes manufactured, with 150 deployed specifically to Okinawa. These specifications, while primitive by contemporary standards of night vision technology, represented revolutionary capability for infantry combat in 1945. The ability to engage human targets accurately at 70-plus yards in complete darkness was unprecedented in the history of infantry warfare. The introduction of infrared night vision technology during the Battle of Okinawa marked a genuine turning point in military history. For the first time in warfare, technology allowed one combatant side to completely dominate the hours of darkness, traditionally the domain of superior training and individual soldier skill. The Japanese infantry, who had been masters of night combat for 40 years of military development, discovered that their greatest tactical advantage had become obsolete virtually overnight. Approximately 150 infrared-equipped carbines, operated by specially trained American soldiers, contributed to a fundamental shift in dynamics during the Pacific War's final major battle. While these devices accounted directly for a relatively small percentage of total Japanese military casualties numerically, they achieved something far more strategically significant. They shattered the Japanese military's confidence in their ability to fight effectively using their most reliable tactical method. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical effects observed in any single engagement. Japanese forces abandoned night operations, which represented their primary tactical advantage, across the entire island front, not merely in areas where infrared devices were actually present. Supply lines were severed throughout the defensive network, positions became isolated from mutual support, and coordinated defense became impossible to execute. The sophisticated tactical system that had served Japan effectively throughout the war collapsed when faced with American technology that seemed to transcend fundamental human limitations. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, among the very few senior Japanese officers who survived the Okinawa battle, wrote in his memoir that the Americans had conquered nature itself, transforming their ally darkness into an American weapon. Japanese forces faced not merely superior firepower or numbers, but superior science applied to warfare. Against this technological dominance, courage alone meant nothing. The American soldiers who operated these first-generation night vision devices were genuine pioneers in a fundamentally new form of warfare, one where information dominance mattered more than raw firepower, where the ability to see meant the difference between victory and defeat. Their experiences, encompassing both tactical successes and psychological burdens unique to their role, established patterns that continue in modern combat operations, where technology provides overwhelming asymmetric advantages. The Battle of Okinawa proved definitively that technology could fundamentally alter the essential nature of warfare itself. The infrared sniper scope did not merely provide a tactical advantage within existing combat frameworks, it destroyed completely an entire military doctrine that had been built carefully over many decades. Japanese forces, who had perfected night combat techniques since 1904, found themselves rendered helpless against American soldiers who could see clearly in complete darkness. The numbers reveal only part of the complete story. 150 devices deployed. 30% of night casualties during the first week attributed to infrared-equipped positions. 94% reduction in Japanese night operations across the campaign. The real victory achieved was fundamentally psychological in nature. The complete demoralization of an enemy military force who realized their decades of training, their personal courage, and their sophisticated tactics were rendered useless against American technology they could not understand, could not detect, and could not counter. From April through June of 1945, the night battles fought across Okinawa demonstrated a fundamental truth that remains profoundly relevant in contemporary warfare. In modern military operations, the side that can see while remaining unseen does not merely possess a significant advantage. They own the battlefield completely. The primitive infrared sniper scopes of 1945, weighing 30 pounds and providing clear vision only to 70 yards, initiated a revolution in military technology that continues to evolve and expand. The Japanese infantry soldiers never expected that American carbines could engage targets at 70 yards in pitch darkness. That failure of imagination and preparation, combined with relentless American technological innovation, contributed to ending the Pacific War and established the fundamental template for American military superiority that persists through the present day. In the green-tinted world visible through those first infrared scopes, American soldiers glimpsed the future character of warfare, a future where technology would matter more than numbers of troops, where information would matter more than weight of firepower, and where owning the night would mean owning victory itself. The lessons drawn from Okinawa's night battles echo through every modern conflict where one combatant side possesses overwhelming technological advantages over their opponents. The infrared sniper scope represented far more than merely a new weapon system. It provided a glimpse into a future where warfare would be dominated not by which side could fight harder or longer, but by which side could see farther and more clearly. The Japanese soldiers who faced this technology during 1945 were the first military forces to learn what every military organization now understands. In the age of technological warfare, darkness no longer provides concealment or protection, and the side that cannot see has already lost before fighting begins.